The lawyer was carrying a folder before he even got out of the car. That was the first thing that felt wrong. The second was that my daughter-in-law was smiling. Not warmly. Confidently. Like someone arriving for a meeting she already expected to win. I watched them through the front window as they walked up my driveway. The wedding had been 9 days earlier. 9. I remember thinking that was an unusually short amount of time for a marriage to produce a lawyer. When the doorbell rang, I already knew this wasn't a social visit. I opened the door. Melissa. Good afternoon, Richard. Her voice sounded rehearsed. The man beside her extended a hand. I didn't take it. He lowered it without seeming embarrassed. That detail stayed with me. People who expect resistance usually prepare for it. My name is Richard Hale. I'm 68 years old, retired, widowed for 6 years, and until that afternoon, I believed my son had married a woman who genuinely loved him. I invited neither of them inside. We stood on the porch. The lawyer opened his folder. Melissa folded her arms. Then she said something that immediately made me suspicious. We'd like to discuss family assets. Not my son's assets. Not their assets. Family assets. I remember looking past them toward the street. Because sometimes the exact words people choose tell you more than the conversation itself. My late wife had left behind substantial wealth. What nobody knew, other than my attorney and accountant, was how substantial. $90 million. I'd kept that fact private for years. Even my son only knew that his mother had left me financially secure. Nothing more. At the time, I thought secrecy was about privacy. Standing on that porch, I began realizing it might have been something else. Protection. Because Melissa wasn't standing there like a newlywed. She was standing there like someone who had recently learned a piece of information. And whatever she'd learned, it had sent her straight to my house with a lawyer. I asked them what this was about. The lawyer glanced at Melissa before answering. That exchange didn't escape me. People usually look at the person paying them before they speak. We'd prefer to discuss this privately. I shook my head. You can discuss it right here. Neither of them seemed pleased. Melissa adjusted the strap of her purse and forced another smile. We've been reviewing some family planning issues. There was that word again. Family. It kept appearing. Not inheritance. Not estate management. Family. That bothered me immediately. Because my son Ethan wasn't standing beside her. If this were truly a family conversation, why wasn't he there? I asked exactly that. Melissa's answer came too quickly. He's busy. Busy. 9 days into a marriage and somehow too busy for a lawyer discussing family assets. I didn't buy it. The lawyer finally opened the folder. Several documents sat inside. Most appeared to be draft agreements. Nothing signed. Nothing official. Still, the fact that they existed told me someone had spent time preparing. And preparation requires intent. We'd like to discuss future estate planning, he said. I almost laughed. Future estate planning. With a woman who had joined the family less than 2 weeks earlier. Something about that timing felt extraordinary. Not illegal. Not even improper on paper. Just strange. Very strange. Eventually, I ended the conversation. Politely. Firmly. I told them any questions regarding my finances could go through my attorney. Nothing else. Melissa's smile disappeared for the first time. Only briefly. But I noticed. Then they left. As I watched the car disappear down the street, I found myself thinking about the wedding. Not the ceremony. The reception. Specifically, a conversation I'd overheard near the bar. At the time, it seemed insignificant. A random comment from one of Melissa's friends. I hadn't thought about it since. Now I couldn't stop thinking about it, because suddenly the lawyer on my porch made that comment sound very different. And if I was remembering the words correctly, someone had been asking questions about my money before the wedding was even over. The comment came back to me that night. I was standing near the reception bar waiting for a club soda when I heard Melissa's friend speaking to someone. I wasn't eavesdropping. I was simply close enough to hear it. Imagine marrying into that kind of money. At the time, I assumed she was talking about Ethan. My son had a good career. Nice house. Stable life. Nothing extraordinary. The person she was speaking with laughed and asked, "How much are we talking?" Her answer was what stuck with me. I don't know exactly. Melissa says it's way more than anyone thinks. Back then I dismissed it. Weddings generate gossip. People speculate. That's what happens. But now, after the lawyer visit, the memory felt different. The next morning I called Ethan. He answered on the third ring. "Hey Dad." His voice sounded normal. Too normal. I asked him a simple question. "Did Melissa tell you she visited me yesterday?" Silence. Not long. Just enough. Then he said, "Visited you?" That bothered me immediately. Because it wasn't the response of someone who knew about the meeting. It was the response of someone hearing about it for the first time. I told him everything. The lawyer. The documents. The conversation. By the end, Ethan wasn't speaking. Finally, he asked one question. "What documents?" I explained. Another long silence followed. Then he said something that stayed with me. "I've never seen any of that paperwork." I didn't react right away. Because if Ethan was telling the truth, it meant Melissa hadn't just kept the visit from me. She'd kept it from her own husband. That afternoon, I called my attorney and asked him to do something unusual. Nothing aggressive. Nothing hostile. I simply wanted to know whether anyone had been making inquiries about my estate. 3 hours later, he called back. And what he told me changed the entire situation. Because Melissa hadn't made one inquiry. She'd made 6. Using 3 different law firms. And she'd started asking questions nearly a month before the wedding. I asked my attorney to repeat that. Not because I hadn't heard him. Because I wanted to make sure I understood it correctly. A month before the wedding? 28 days, he said. The precision bothered me. People don't accidentally contact 3 different law firms over 4 weeks. That takes effort, planning, purpose. I thanked him and ended the call. Then I sat in my study staring at a framed photo of my late wife. Claire had been gone 6 years. Long enough for the sharpest grief to fade. Not long enough for me to stop talking to her picture when something didn't make sense. This didn't make sense. At least not yet. That evening, Ethan showed up unannounced. He looked exhausted. Marriage was 9 days old and already putting shadows under his eyes. Not a great sign. We sat at the kitchen table. The same table where he'd done homework as a kid. The same table where Claire used to make pancakes on Sunday mornings. I showed him the notes from my attorney. The inquiry dates. The law firms. The records. Ethan read everything twice. Then a third time. He didn't defend Melissa. He didn't accuse her either. He just kept reading. Finally, he asked if he could use my guest room for the night. That question told me more than anything he'd said. Around midnight, I heard him on the back patio talking on the phone. I wasn't trying to listen. The house was quiet. His voice carried. "Why didn't you tell me?" Long pause. Then, "No, that's not what I'm asking." Another pause. Then silence. The next morning, Ethan looked 10 years older. He sat across from me with a cup of coffee and admitted something. 3 weeks before the wedding, Melissa had suddenly become obsessed with family finances. Not theirs. Mine. Questions about trust. Questions about property. Questions about future inheritance. At the time, he thought she was just planning ahead. Now he wasn't so sure. Then he told me something else. Something he'd found the night before. Melissa had a folder on her laptop. And every file inside it had one thing in common. My name. Ethan didn't open the folder right away. At first, he wasn't even looking for it. According to him, Melissa had stepped out to meet a friend the previous evening. While she was gone, he used her laptop to print a document. That's when he noticed it. A folder labeled Future Planning. Nothing unusual about that. Couples make plans all the time. What caught his attention was a subfolder underneath. Richard. My first name. Not family. Not estate. Not finances. Just Richard. He clicked it. What he found made him call me at midnight. Property records. Public filings. Old business registrations. Archived newspaper articles about a company I'd sold years earlier. Even photographs of homes I'd owned decades ago. Someone had spent months gathering information. Not casually. Systematically. The strangest part wasn't what was there. It was what wasn't. No information about Ethan. No information about their future together. Nothing related to their marriage. Just me. Page after page. Document after document. A research project centered entirely on my finances. I listened quietly while Ethan described everything. Then I asked the question that mattered. Did she explain it? He nodded. Sort of. Apparently Melissa claimed she was simply trying to understand the family's financial future. On the surface that sounded reasonable. Except for one problem. Most people don't hire lawyers and conduct investigations before asking basic questions. That's what kept bothering me. The sequence. Every step seemed backward. Research first. Lawyers second. Marriage third. Then the visit to my house. That afternoon, Ethan returned home to speak with her. I didn't hear from him again until nearly 11 that night. When my phone rang, his voice sounded calm. Too calm. The kind of calm people reach after a difficult realization. She admitted she knew more than she told me. I sat up straighter. About what? There was a long silence. Then he answered. About your money. What he said next explained the lawyers. The folder. The timing. Everything. And suddenly the wedding itself looked very different. According to Ethan, the truth started with a conversation Melissa had before they were engaged. A distant relative of mine had attended a charity event years earlier. At some point, he'd heard rumors about the size of Claire's estate. Not facts. Rumors. But large enough to attract attention. Those rumors eventually reached Melissa through mutual acquaintances. Most people would have ignored them. Melissa didn't. Instead, she started digging. Property records. Corporate filings. Old business transactions. Anything she could find. By her own admission, she spent nearly a year researching my finances before she married Ethan. That detail sat with me for a long time. Not because of the money. Because of the patience. People don't spend a year researching someone unless the answer matters to them. A lot. When Ethan confronted her, she finally admitted something else. The lawyer visit had been her idea alone. Not his. Not a joint decision. Not family planning. The proposed documents were designed to establish future claims and expectations regarding inheritance structures. Nothing illegal. Nothing binding. Just an attempt to start positioning herself early. Very early. The problem wasn't the paperwork. The problem was that she'd hidden all of it from her husband. By midnight, Ethan had moved out. Not permanently. At least not yet. He checked into a hotel and spent the night thinking. The next morning, he called me from the parking lot. I don't know what to do. I understood that. Because this wasn't really about money anymore. Money had simply revealed something. The real issue was trust. And trust is difficult to evaluate once someone starts hiding motives. Then Ethan told me one final thing. After their argument, Melissa sent him a message. Just one sentence. No apology. No explanation. No defense. A question. And the fact that she asked it at all told me she still didn't understand why he was upset. Because her first concern wasn't the marriage. It was whether I planned to change my estate. When Ethan showed me the message, I read it twice. Not because it was complicated. Because it was so revealing. The text said, "Have you talked to your dad about updating anything yet?" That was it. No mention of the argument. No mention of trust. No mention of the fact that her husband had just left. Just the estate. The timing mattered. Most people, after a fight like that, would worry about the relationship. Melissa worried about paperwork. I remember handing the phone back and saying nothing. There wasn't much left to say. Over the next 2 weeks, Ethan met with her several times. Sometimes in person. Sometimes over the phone. Each conversation seemed to make things clearer. Not better. Clear. According to Ethan, Melissa kept insisting she'd done nothing wrong. Everything she'd researched was technically public information. The lawyers hadn't broken any laws. The documents weren't binding. Every defense focused on legality. None focused on honesty. That distinction became important. Very important. Eventually Ethan asked her a question. Simple. Direct. If my father had been worth $50,000 instead of $90 million, would any of this have happened? She didn't answer immediately. That silence gave him the answer before she ever spoke. Later, when Ethan repeated that conversation to me, I felt less angry than I expected. Mostly I felt disappointed. Because greed rarely announces itself dramatically. It usually arrives dressed as practicality, as planning, as concern. Until one day you realize every road somehow leads back to the same destination. Money. The strange thing is that the $90 million wasn't what protected me. The secret protected me. If Melissa had known the truth from the beginning, I would have spent years wondering whether her intentions were genuine. Instead, she answered that question herself. And by the end of the month, Ethan had made a decision that surprised almost everyone except me. He chose certainty over hope. And not everyone in the family took that well. Ethan filed for an annulment. The marriage had lasted less than 2 months. Some relatives thought he was overreacting. Others said he should try counseling first. A few insisted Melissa had simply made mistakes. Maybe she did. But Ethan kept coming back to the same point. The problem wasn't one decision. It was a pattern. The research. The hidden inquiries. The lawyer visit. The secret folder. The conversations he was never supposed to know about. Each piece by itself might have been explainable. Together they told a different story. One built long before the wedding. The annulment process wasn't particularly dramatic. No public accusations. No courtroom speeches. No family war. Just paperwork. Meetings. Signatures. the quiet ending of something that had barely begun. A few months later, Ethan came over for dinner. We sat on the patio watching the sun go down. At some point he asked the question everyone else had been wondering. "Why didn't you ever tell me how much Mom left you?" I smiled. "Because I wanted you to build your life without that number hanging over it." He nodded. Then he laughed. "Turns out that was a pretty good decision." It was. Not because it exposed Melissa. Because it protected Ethan. Money has a way of attracting certainty from people who haven't earned it. Plans. Expectations. Entitlement. Sometimes before the money even exists. My late wife used to say that character is easiest to evaluate when nobody thinks there's anything to gain. The older I get, the more I think she was right. The 90 million is still there. Managed by the same advisors. Invested the same way. My life hasn't changed much. But Ethan's has. A year later he met someone new. Someone kind. Someone honest. Someone who didn't ask a single question about inheritances, trusts, or family assets. And that's when I finally knew the smartest decision I'd ever made wasn't keeping the money secret. It was teaching my son that trust is worth more than any amount attached to a bank account.